So the finale of episode 2 of The First Soldier has taken place, and it officially cements the relationship between Sephiroth and Angeal. But we also get way more lore on the power of Masamune, how it operates, and also what entity might be living inside of the blade. So let's talk about it. So very quickly before we move on to the recap, this was posted by the Ever Crisis account on Twitter. Not only is this going to be the finale of episode 2 of The First Soldier, this is the finale of young Sephiroth's story, period, meaning they've told the story they want to tell, and there won't be any more young Sephiroth after this. So the chances of getting an episode 3 feel incredibly slim. Also, if you'd like to get caught up to speed on the story of The First Soldier episode 2, I'll leave a playlist in the description so you can watch my previous videos and figure out who's who, what's what, and where everyone is and what the heck is happening. So we move into chapter 5, and Sephiroth is still working his way through these trials to prove to these mysterious spirits that he is in fact worthy of wielding the blade Masamune. And these trials have been super arduous, really pushing Sephiroth physically, but also mentally. And he's being weighed down, and Angeal can sense that. And he tries to give advice to Sephiroth, essentially saying, look, you're weighed down by your past, cut it loose, move forward, and focus on fighting, which triggers a flashback for Sephiroth. And in this flashback, he's hanging out with Glenn, Matt, and Lucia, people who were incredibly influential on him, and one of the few groups of people in his life that actually treated him as an equal. They didn't look at him like he was a science experiment. They didn't try to manipulate him. They just viewed him as a kid, which is something he's never had before. And the whole basis of this conversation is that the group is trying to help Sephiroth just kind of find his motivation, and it's done via the conduit of a conversation about the weapon he's using, which is a standard issue Shinra blade. And Lucia's like, that doesn't hold you back, it's just kind of a regular weapon. And Sephiroth doesn't really feel like it does. But again, he's not really questioning a lot of things. He's just told what to do and where to go, and he just does it. And Glenn is like, well, maybe you need something a little bit more heroic, to which Sephiroth still doesn't really agree with, until Matt brings up the idea that you're still really young. You don't really quite know what your ideals, your dreams, and your desires are yet. And Glenn tells him, once you figure out what that desire is, that thing you want more than anything, that is when your life truly begins. And at this point in time, in the present, the thing that Sephiroth wants the most is the Masamune. So this is an incredibly transformative moment in Sephiroth's life where he's starting to mold and shape who he's going to become. Unfortunately, there are some darker forces at play here that are also molding Sephiroth into who they want him to become. Now, in a rare moment, Sephiroth actually opens up to Angeal, and he's like, yeah, my past is weighing me down, but that's because these memories I have with these people are incredibly precious. I can't just cut them loose. And Angeal completely understands, and he apologizes for even suggesting the notion that Sephiroth try to forget about these people who are so important to him. And as kind of like a little make good to, smooth things over, Angeal, which he's been doing this the entire journey, just trying to get Sephiroth to open up, and he's joking with him. He tells Sephiroth, save some room in your memories for me. Alyssa chimes in as well. And surprisingly, Sephiroth responds with, I'll think about it. So he's slowly but surely starting to open himself up to the group and let down those walls, which is really great to see. So as they move forward, they hear the voice of Glenn calling out to Rose, and they immediately know that this is a trap, but Sephiroth is so dead set on getting the Masamune that he pushes forward. And Alyssa says something here that is incredibly important. It makes sense later on in the story, but she says to Angeal, he has to learn sooner or later what his weaknesses are. It's better he learns sooner rather than later. So just hold on to that for a second. Now, as they push forward, the landscape in front of them changes. It's not just ruins and rubble. It's now changed into this really beautiful land that looks very similar to Wutai. And that's because the people that founded Wutai used to live in a land called Igara. But when they were forced to move from Igara because the lands were badly damaged by that monster we covered in a previous chapter, these 5 warriors showed up, defeated the monster, but in doing so, they used some really powerful magic that unfortunately scorched the land, forcing the people to find a new place to live, which would be Wutai. So that's why the structures look very Wutaian. Alyssa, Bachman, Sephiroth are all enamored with the look of this place, but Angeal continues to remind them, keep your guard up. Something about this does not feel right, which he's been trying to do this entire mission. He's seemingly one of the only few people not really affected by the illusions this area is putting out in some of the tricks that it's been trying to play on the group. Now, in this moment, we shift over to Angeal's perspective, and he has a flashback where he's spending time with his dad, and they're picking the greatest thing from Crisis Core, dumb apples. And the whole point of this flashback is that it's a reminder for Angeal to remember that not everybody experiences happiness the way that he does. In this entire journey, he's been trying to get Sephiroth to open up and kind of see things the way that he sees them. So when he has this flashback, he tells his father, look, my dream is to move you and mom to Midgar into a nice home and you'll be happy and taken care of. But his dad reminds him, we're happy here doing what we're doing, living in our home, living on our land, picking dumb apples. Which reinforces to Angeal that not everyone experiences life and happiness the same way. But he gives Angeal some advice, saying that if you yourself change, eventually the world around you will change as well. So instead of trying to force someone to change, work on yourself and everything will kind of follow, which I think is a really great motto for life. And that's something that Angeal in this moment really needs to remember. After this, we get a switch to Sephiroth's perspective, and he's looking at this landscape and he realizes it looks familiar, which kicks us to a flashback that took place after the group got back from Rador, where a lot of the really awful stuff went down. The island was destroyed, and Sephiroth unfortunately had to mercy kill the young kid, Rosen. And during their debriefing, he remembers that Matt showed him a photo of the place that they're supposed to go to next, which looks exactly like the land that they're currently on. However, at this moment, Glenn, Matt, and Lucia are called in for a meeting because they're being reprimanded, essentially. Sephiroth is rewarded for what happened on Rador, even though he tries to tell Shinra, what you're hearing isn't right. Like, I'm part of why this went wrong. I should be punished too. But he's seemingly singled out and praised for what happened. Now, as Glenn and the crew were leaving, he asked Sephiroth to look after the dog Refu, who was Rosen's dog. So as the island was going to crap, they grabbed Refu and they took off so he wouldn't be left alone. And it cuts to the next day, and Refu is clearly depressed. He misses Rosen, he also misses Glenn, Matt, and Lucia, and he's refusing to eat. And this is a moment for Sephiroth to look inwards, where he's truly caring about Refu, not just because it's another being, but he knows how important this dog has become to Glenn, Matt, and Lucia, and he doesn't want to let them down. But he's also realizing, if I can't get a dog to eat, then what kind of leader am I going to be as a soldier? Now it cuts to the next day, and Sephiroth comes back to check on Refu. However, Refu's gone, so he's searching the corridors to see if the dog is still there, and he overhears two soldiers speaking about Glenn, Matt, and Lucia, to which this is the moment Sephiroth finds out that they deserted Shinra and left. So he puts two and two together and realizes that at some point they came back and got Refu and they left. However, they left Sephiroth behind, and this truly, truly hurts Sephiroth. He literally utters the words, "They left me behind," which again really hurts him because these were the first people that he actually felt comfortable around and opened up to, and they just left him. So this is where he starts to put up those walls again, and he's going through these Shinra trials that Hojo is putting him through, and he is performing better, but his mentality is, if I can forget about them, if I can suppress these emotions, it will make me a better fighter. But he realizes the reason he's doing better is because he has some sort of control. He can take those emotions and use them to fuel himself in combat rather than let them control him. He is now controlling those memories and thoughts. So it cuts back to present day, and Sephiroth then changes his tune and says, actually, no, I don't recognize what we're looking at, and he leaves. Now, as the group progresses, we do have a moment where Angeal is still very determined to reach Sephiroth. He likes to pull out his Buster Sword. It's a really great memory of his parents, but also just a reminder of why he does what he does, and he vows to break through to Sephiroth. Even if it's not by words, he will do so by action, which keep that in mind too, because that plays into the latter half of this story. So the group progresses forward and they find an image that we saw in a previous chapter, which is these two giant monster hands holding two bodies. This time they're holding Glenn and Rosen. And this is another trial from the spirits to get Sephiroth to make a very difficult choice. Now the spirit of Glenn, because we know it's not actually Glenn, is telling Sephiroth, pick Rosen, save Rosen. You always wanted to save him, now is your opportunity to do so. which triggers another flashback for Sephiroth where he is at the beginning of his journey with Glenn, Matt, and Lucia, and he's kind of preaching to them this whole idea that you can't let your emotions get in your way because it makes you a second-rate soldier. And he's really just kind of on this emotionless kind of path, to which Glenn, sometimes, speaking without thinking, agrees with him, which offends Sephiroth, but then he goes in and he actually hugs Sephiroth. And he tells him straight up, we know how strong you are, you have nothing to prove to us, but it wouldn't kill you to have a little bit of compassion for what's going on. Sephiroth obviously is kind of upset by some of those words, and he responds to Glenn by saying, look, like, I'm not a cyborg, meaning like he's trying, he just doesn't know how to be emotional and share those thoughts and feelings because all he's ever known is fighting in Shinra. Glenn apologizes because he's a really good dude. We hit a black screen and there's another line from Sephiroth where, in reference to the whole cyborg thing, he says, it's not like I wanted to become one anyway, which I think is really interesting because Sephiroth, is this character who is kind of viewed as almost not necessarily emotionless, but he can be very monotone. He's very stoic as we've come to know him. So that I think is just kind of a really interesting observation into the character of Sephiroth. So it cuts back to present day. Sephiroth is still trying to figure out what to do. Again, Glenn is telling him to save Rosen, which triggers another flashback that we saw in episode 1 where Sephiroth is pleading with Rosen to go with Glenn and the crew, leave the island, otherwise he'll die. And Sephiroth is trying really, really hard because in that point in the story, he made a choice that is essentially, I've opened up to Glenn, Matt, and Lucia. They encouraged me to open up to Rosen because Sephiroth doesn't really know anyone else his own age. So he finally makes the choice of, okay, I think I'm going to try and get to know this kid and maybe I can make a friend. And when he finally makes that decision, he loses that person. And that person doesn't want to be saved. He tells Sephiroth, I just want to be with my people. And he asks for a mercy kill. But he's also kind of helping Sephiroth figure out, what does he really want in this moment? Does Sephiroth really want to save Rosen? Or is he doing it because of Glenn, Matt, and Lucia, which Sephiroth does mention. He tells Rosen, if you don't want to be saved for me, please do it for them. These are good people, probably a little too good, and it's going to get them killed one day, which, foreshadows what happens to Glenn, unfortunately. But that just reinforces from Rosen, like, why are you really doing this? Are you doing it for me or are you doing it for them? Which also reinforces how much Sephiroth truly loves and cares about Glenn and the crew. They've had such a massive impact on him. Now it cuts back to present day and Sephiroth realizes, what's the point? It doesn't matter what I choose because we've done this song and dance before. I pick somebody, you kill the other person, and then we just end up fighting anyway, so why are we doing this? The entity responds by saying, because it's your destiny, which is a little vague, but I think it makes a little bit more sense the more we unfold the story. Now, in my playthrough, I picked Glenn. I don't think it really matters. I think just the whole point of this section is the fact that Sephiroth realizes that pretty much his whole life, he's never made any choices and it doesn't matter. And especially in this trial, he's not going to be tricked by whatever this entity is trying to do to him. So they end up fighting this boss, which is a pretty cool looking, almost Genova-ish creature. And after the fight, they deem Sephiroth now worthy of wielding the Masamune. But the entities say some words to Sephiroth which are really suspicious. They tell him, listen carefully to the blade's whispers. It will guide you, free you from the pain of different decisions. They want him to live with the Masamune always at his side, and they remind him, you are truly exceptional. And right away, Angeal, again, the voice of reason, knows something here is not right. Why would they say those words to Sephiroth? And Alyssa downplays it, which she's been doing this entire story. Whenever Angeal is finding a way to try and get to Sephiroth and break through to him or suggest something, Alyssa is there to shoot it down. And that's the end of chapter 5. Now moving into chapter 6, some of the footage is my own captured footage. However, I unfortunately reached a bitch-ass progression block in the form of a big green dragon that murked me with poison breath. My characters were not strong enough to make it through the fight, so thankfully Faz Faz has uploaded chapter 6 and will be pulling from their footage for the second half of this video. Their characters are super powerful. They just mowed through the enemy like it was nothing, so they came in very clutch, saving my butt for this video. So after the victory, they returned to the chamber which held not only the body of Masamune, the blacksmith, but the sword itself. Now, it's not visible to anybody, but Sephiroth can sense that it is in fact there, and he goes to grab it. And I'll play for you guys the scene where he actually grabs the Masamune and it transforms, because it's pretty cool and it's a really epic moment. So everyone is impressed by this blade, seemingly everyone, minus Angeal, and Sephiroth is able to change the length of the blade at will, and he just kind of views it as a blessing from the spirits. Now, what's kind of funny is that Tetsuya Nomura spoiled this in an interview that I covered a few months ago, where he talks about, yeah, Sephiroth obtains the Masamune, it has this inorganic quality, and it can change its shape whenever it wants to. On top of that, it can disappear and reappear whenever Sephiroth needs it. So that explains in canon why in the Final Fantasy VII universe, specifically in the remake trilogy, you sometimes see Sephiroth with his blade, and then in the next shot it's just completely gone, or maybe the length of the blade is different in some scenes compared to others. So they're just kind of giving in-universe canon to why the blade acts the way it does. And the moment all of this is going on, Angeal, again, immediately clocks it. He's like, this ain't right, dude. This sword should not exist. This feels bad. So as they're getting ready to leave, Bachman gets the idea of, hey, I want to get a really cool heroic shot of you, Sephiroth, leaving this chamber. It's going to look great. Sephiroth, obviously, he's not into that. He's like, dude, no, I'm not going to do that. But Alyssa does what she does this entire story, and she's able to persuade Sephiroth into doing that. So he agrees. Now, as they leave the chamber, this is where something really strange happens. Now, the road that the group took to get into that chamber was nothing but rubble, swamps, and monsters. However, now the landscape is completely different. It's the Scarlet Pavilion of Agara, which again is super Wu-Taian because that's where the origins of Wu-Tai live. Angeal immediately is like, this is a trick, but Sephiroth, Alyssa, Bachman, they're loving it. This place is beautiful. They're viewing this as a reward from the spirits to congratulate Sephiroth for obtaining the blade, as some sort of parade. But of course, Angeal is like, look man, do not get carried away. Essentially, don't let this go to your head. Keep your guard up. Now they keep moving through this pavilion and they're encountering more spirits who are celebrating Sephiroth. I think they even go as far as to call him a savior. Like, this is some serious, dangerous hero worship going on. But it's all seemingly to reinforce to Sephiroth that he made the right choice and that he's on the right path. It's really gassing him up. Same thing with Alyssa and Bachman. They're just super impressed by all this. But again, Angeal knows this is a facade, but the others just can't seem to see that. Now, as they move through the pavilion, they encounter a very evil, mean green dragon that killed my progress that I mentioned earlier. This dude was insane. However, the group beats him, and Alyssa's like, that's it? That was not an enemy worthy of the hero Sephiroth. Alyssa, I beg to differ. I thought it was a little too difficult. But as they're fighting, Angeal is noticing this isn't Sephiroth. It feels like the sword is controlling him and Sephiroth is the puppet. To which Alyssa, again, countering Angeal, says, oh, it's just because you're jealous. And she warns Sephiroth, you shouldn't hang out with jealous people like that. So they leave and they make their way to the entrance of the temple. Now, as they're getting ready to leave, they get jumped by shadow versions of Sephiroth and Angeal, which are super cool. I don't know if they're really important to the story. I think it could be more of like a reflective inwards moment of defeating your inner darker self, but I think they just wanted a cool boss fight as you leave the temple. Now they win the fight and Bachman's like, okay, I need to get one more hero shot of you exiting this temple, Sephiroth, let's go. So Angeal and Alyssa are still in the entrance of the temple as Sephiroth and Bachman move forward. But as they're filming, they hear laughter coming from inside of the temple. They run back in and those two big monster hands that we saw earlier now have Angeal and Alyssa in their grasp. And they reveal to Sephiroth, this isn't a trial. This is not an illusion. This one is very much real. Thankfully, in that moment, because Angeal is so strong, not just physically, but in terms of his will, he's able to break out from this monster's grasp. And this is where we learn the truth of who and what Alyssa actually is. So she reveals to the group that the moment they stepped onto the island, she was possessed by the spirits of the island and forced to do some really awful stuff. They essentially want to turn her into a monster. And she's pleading with Sephiroth and Angeal that she doesn't want that to happen, and she wants them to kill her. She wants to die. She's been through so much awful stuff, she can't go through it anymore. But unfortunately, it's too late and she starts to transform. But in this moment, the Masamune has a mind of its own and it moves, which startles Sephiroth, and it's found a new target. Unfortunately, that target is Angeal. Angeal is pleading with Sephiroth to remember to not let this weapon control him. This is what these spirits want. They want full control of Sephiroth. So he needs to look inward to control his emotions so he can control the Masamune. And he has a moment where he looks inwards and he's remembering his mother. Again, we see the photo of who we know to be Lucrezia. However, Hojo has told Sephiroth that that's Genova. So he's not quite getting the full picture there, but he's just looking inwards to his mother of like, what do I do? As this is happening, Angeal is fighting the monster off. Unfortunately, his standard issue sword ends up breaking in half. So he's almost defenseless at this point. The monster then turns its attention to Sephiroth, and Sephiroth is able to block some of the attacks, but because he's so shook right now and he's not in his right mind, he's down on one knee, he's not going to be able to take one more hit. So the monster goes to strike him down, and Angeal jumps in the way with his Buster Sword, blocking the attack. The sword holds up, he saves Sephiroth. Sephiroth is incredibly impressed, not only by the power of the sword, but the fact that Angeal protected him, which I think just adds way more weight to the Buster Sword. Again, throughout this journey, the one thing that's been able to really keep Angeal safe and help him break out of whatever weird illusions he was going through or really bad dreams, it was the Buster Sword. It's a reminder of where he comes from, who made it for him. There even are some hints that perhaps maybe his dad is watching over him in spirit, not maybe through the Buster Sword, but just like he's there keeping an eye on his kid. And that Buster Sword has been the one key to protecting Angeal and keeping him safe. And now he's using it to keep Sephiroth safe. It also adds way more weight to when Angeal uses that blade, because we know from Crisis Core he very rarely will use it unless it's super important. We see him use it to protect Zack and Wutai, we see him use it to stop Sephiroth and Genesis from fighting, and now we see him use it for the very first time, and it's to protect Sephiroth. So this is the moment where their bond is officially cemented. They're not just co-workers or friends, like they're gonna become brothers. And it shows also how important Angeal is to a character like Sephiroth. He kept him on the straight and narrow, was a good influence. And that blade, whatever may be inside, clearly didn't want that. So in this moment, Sephiroth apologizes to Angeal for everything that's happened and for how he's been acting. And in true Angeal fashion, he's like, dude, it's all right. You may be a cyborg, you may be this false hero that Shinra's propping up, but never forget, you have friends. You got me. And in that moment, Sephiroth not only masters the Masamune, but he has to make this incredibly hard decision of now he has to kill a monster that looks like his mom, which is super sick and twisted, which I think again plays into a theory that I have at the end of this video as to how this all started in the first place. So the creature is named Revenant Mother Alyssa. Super gross looking, again, very Genova-like. They beat the creature. Unfortunately, the real Alyssa Goldie, who is now released from the spirits, is too badly wounded, and she doesn't survive. So we cut to the group outside of the temple, and they're waiting for a Shinra chopper to come and pick them up. And in this moment, they're having some banter, getting closer. You really see Sephiroth let those walls down and, be really comfortable around someone like Angeal. But then he gets serious and he realizes what happened here with the Masamune, we have to keep it a secret. We cannot tell Shinra what this weapon is capable of, because if we do, they're gonna take it from me and they're gonna do what they do. Research, analysis, use it for their own twisted needs. And Bachman's like, well, what about me, man? Like, I just captured all this incredible footage. What am I supposed to do? And Sephiroth is just like, look, if anything gets out, you're the first person I'm going to. So he kind of threatens him very lightly, but it's also very serious. So we cut to the group on one of the choppers, and Bachman is overlooking his footage, and he shows some of it to Angeal, who then shows it to Sephiroth. And it cuts back to the moment where they first met Alyssa. And here's where one of the other twists happens. She takes off her helmet, and we see a completely different girl under that helmet. She doesn't look like Lucrezia at all. We see the real, true Alyssa Goldie, which is crazy. And that means that the spirits were projecting an image of what they wanted Sephiroth to see, which is why she looked like Lucrezia. They needed somebody that Sephiroth would just instinctively want to listen to and trust, someone who could push him into the right direction, which I promise will make sense. So Sephiroth is shook. Now, after this, we cut to a black screen, and Bachman says that his footage was eventually shelved. However, he couldn't stop thinking about what happened on the island and what those spirits were, so he kept poking and prodding and maybe sticking his nose where it didn't belong, and his boss kept stopping him. We don't know who his boss is, but I think I have an idea. So we cut to a cutscene, which is actually something we saw at the very beginning of this episode, and it's this robed figure walking through the land of Robio with a camera, and it's Bachman, and he's walking through trying to figure out what these spirits were. And it turns out he's been doing some theory crafting of his own, and he comes to the conclusion that these spirits that they encountered, the being living inside of the Masamune, the will of the Masamune, was probably Jenova all along. So there's your third, fourth, fifth, 80th twist in this story, is that this whole entire thing was probably set up and manipulated from the get-go by Jenova. So the manipulation from her on Sephiroth began very, very early on in his younger years, his formative years, when he's most impressionable. So every time we saw those purple spirits and energy orbs, it was Jenova. The entity that possessed Alyssa and put Sephiroth through these trials was Jenova. The being inside of the Masamune that was trying to control Sephiroth was Jenova. The being that seemingly tried to eliminate Angeal from the equation and stop him from influencing Sephiroth was Jenova. So this was all one big trial from Jenova that started at a very young age to mold Sephiroth into what it wanted him to become, to obtain this weapon that she was inside of that would bring her closer to her kid. And it's really crazy when you think about it, because this big space alien is essentially like, I gotta find my kid and I gotta make sure he becomes who I need him to become, so that way we can do some bigger, grander stuff in the future. Which it is important to remember that Sephiroth is now in full control of the Masamune. He's controlling it. It is no longer controlling him because of the help from Angeal. And we see that because when he looks at that camera and he sees the true, real Alyssa, he doesn't see the Lucrezia version anymore. I think that pretty much confirms that he's no longer under the influence of Jenova. He's in full control, seeing the real deal truth. So that doesn't technically really mess with the lore of Sephiroth too much. He's still Sephiroth. He's in full control up until the moment where he's in Nibelheim and he snaps and, makes that really big choice and decides to burn it all down. So just wanted to clarify that, because I don't want people to assume that, they may have twisted the lore and now everything that happens after this is because of Jenova. She essentially just somehow set this big plan in motion to get Masamune to craft the sword. Perhaps maybe the sword itself was crafted from materials from the meteorite. They don't really confirm that, but it really just kind of seemed like all of these things happened because she was trying to nudge Sephiroth into the right direction to obtain that weapon. It also kind of makes you wonder, how different would this story be if Angeal did die that day? And how different would it be if he never died, period? He was clearly a very good influence on Sephiroth. Could he have been someone that prevented him from snapping and losing his mind and taking out all of Nibelheim and becoming this incredibly dangerous villain? But it also makes me wonder, who was Bachman's boss? Now, Bachman is listed as the chief of the Shinra Records and Archives Department, so they never explicitly say who his boss is. But if he ended up being a robed figure, I could see maybe him poking his nose where it didn't belong, leading to the punishment of being experimented on by Hojo, which leads me to also believe that maybe Hojo knew all along what was going to happen on this island. Maybe he knew that mysterious energy signal from Robio was in fact Jenova, and by sending Sephiroth there, it would continue to further not only improve him as a fighter, but continue to manipulate him even further into what he wants him to be, which just continues to add more twisted layers onto Hojo, because he's arguably, in a world of Final Fantasy VII that has so many monsters, you can argue that Hojo is the biggest monster of them all based on what he does, his lack of care for human life. He's a psychopath. I also can't help but notice that throughout this chapter in particular, there's a lot of this random voice that's just laughing, and it's not like a ha ha, it's a he 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 creepy kind of laugh, which really reminds me a lot of Hojo. So again, I don't really know how much involvement Hojo could have had, but that laughing just really reminds me of him. It's probably nothing, but I just thought that was really interesting. But to finally figure out, like, yeah, this was Jenova the entire time. All of these trials, the monsters, the weapon itself was just trying to forge Sephiroth into what it wanted him to be. And then the very last shot of this episode is Advent Children Sephiroth, funny enough, in the flames in Nibelheim, turning, walking away, and starting his journey as one of the most iconic bad guys in all of video games. And with that comes the end of episode 2 of The First Soldier. Looking at the finale of episode 2 of The First Soldier, I don't think it was bad, but it was clearly very rushed, and it feels like they could have told more story, but apparently they're done. This is going to be it. If this is in fact the final episode of The First Soldier, that probably means that this is also my final recap for Ever Crisis, because if we ain't getting any more content, there's not going to be anything more to recap. So I just want to say a really big thank you to Faz Faz, who's been playing through Ever Crisis pretty much since the beginning of the game's launch. They've been archiving every single event, big or small, including all of the story stuff on their channel. And if this game does get shut down relatively soon, the only way we're going to be able to revisit this stuff is going through their channel. So thanks to them for archiving all of this stuff and providing the footage for people like me and others to actually cover it and recap it and discuss it. And also a big thank you to everyone who watches my recaps. I sometimes struggle with these recaps, wondering if I'm doing a good enough job. Am I conveying everything that the story is trying to tell the player? Am I including all of the important details? Is it interesting? Is it entertaining? Is it boring? I really struggled with that stuff, but thank you to everyone who's been sticking along and checking out the recaps and who've been invested in this story, because I think for the most part, this has been a really awesome story. I think maybe the ending was a little flat, but perhaps they just want to save more stuff for part 3. But again, big thank you to everyone who's been checking out these recaps. Again, in the description, I will link you to Faz Faz's channel so you can go and check out all of the Ever Crisis stuff and use it as a really cool archive for this story. With that being said, I am Curious Corduroy. That is the video. Let me know in the comments down below, what do you also think about the twists that happened at the end of this story, revealing that Jenova was probably the perpetrator of this entire incident. Leave those in the comments down below. I will see you guys in the next video. Please remember to always be excellent to one another.